Hey everyone, and welcome to the Believe Again podcast, powered by Parable Church Bookkeeping and Accounting. I'm your host, Josh Robry. On this show, we discuss the challenges and triumphs of ministry, offering hope and practical insights for pastors and leaders everywhere. Our goal is to explore the heart of what it means to believe again and lead well in every season. And today, we have an important conversation that I think will resonate with every pastor and leader out there. As the election season approaches, navigating the political landscape while keeping the focus on Christ can be a challenge, or at least sometimes it could be a challenge for me. I'm sure it's a challenge for others out there as well. And here's the question: how do we guide our congregations and the people that we're leading through this time with grace, wisdom, and unity? Our guest today is the incredible Greg Surratt. He's the founding pastor of Seacoast Church and a co-founder of ARC. He's here to share his experiences and insights on pastoring through an election season. So let's go ahead and jump into that conversation right now. Pastor Greg, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, great to be with you. Always is.
Well, I've had a good time hanging out with you this year. I think I've been to the retreat a couple times and got to fish and hang out. What's something fun that you've been able to get into recently?
Oh man, I've been trying to improve my golfing. I went out and did an hour of practice the other day, and I told my wife, I said, when you practice for an hour on the wrong things, you just get worse. Yeah, I haven't been doing much fishing recently, but I'm going to get out in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, great. Well, give us an update on what's happening with the retreat. I know you guys are making a lot of improvements.
We ended up taking some time off, a lot longer than we thought. Hey, who knew that a building project cost more and took more time and was harder than you had anticipated,
Yeah.
Been around long enough to know that stuff happens. But anyway, making some great improvements. The whole place is going to be just even better. We're opening back up January and filling up, and it's going to be just a great season. But we've upgraded the experience as far as beds and bedrooms and all of that. We have commercial kitchen now and just all kinds of things. It's just going to be great. So.
Was there anything that you guys didn't plan to update that after you got in there and started tearing stuff down that you decided to add?
Yeah, well, it wasn't so much us. It was the county said, hey, listen, while you're doing this, why don't we put in a commercial sprinkler system? We'd already put in a sprinkler system for residential, and because we basically have a house. And they said, no, it's a hotel now. So that set us back about 3 months and increased the cost of the project by nearly $500,000. So anyway,
oh goodness,
that's always fun, but it's going to make us better. So overall, it's going to be good.
Well, I can't wait to be back there next year. I know we got some retreats scheduled for ARC pastors and the ARC coaches, and I'm really looking forward to being back there.
Well, we're looking forward to you coming, and we are going to invite any pastors of churches that were involved in either Helene or the one that was down in Florida after first of the year to come and take a little R&R and let us love on you just a little bit. So
that'd be great.
Excited about that. Yeah.
Well, I'm excited about our topic today, and that's pastoring through an election season, something you've done many times. We've talked about this at the retreat. I love getting into these politic conversations with you and your stories of working with different leaders. The stories are more about that than policy or anything. I just think you have such a unique perspective on this because you're a unifier. You have a way of bringing people from different perspectives together. And so I'm really excited that you're the person that I get to talk to about this. Would love to just set you up by asking you, maybe explain a little bit how you're uniquely qualified, not just as a pastor that's been around for a while, but someone who's been involved in the political realm, kind of behind the scenes in some ways. Why are you uniquely qualified to talk about this?
Well, I don't know if I'm uniquely qualified. Okay. I'll put it that way, but do have a lot of experience. And what's interesting, I did a message the other day. We're doing a series in our church called Not on the Ballot, I think it is, or Not Up for Vote. I think that's what it is. And they asked me to open it up, and what a joy that is. But I talked about our identity, which I feel strongly about, our identity in Christ. But as I was preparing that message, I stopped and just pointed out to our church how many people that we have in our church that serve in politics. There may be churches that have more, especially in the Washington area, possibly, but We have a lot. Down through the years, we've got town council people in, just about everywhere where we have campuses. We have multiple mayors, there's state senators and state representatives. On the national level, we have had the last six first district, which is basically a big part of Charleston, Myrtle Beach, and Hilton Head, House of Representatives. The last six of those came to our church. What was interesting is that's both parties. It was Republican, and then it became Democrat for a season, and then Republican. And so we have had people from the first district on both sides of the aisle running against one another
Hmm.
for Congress. That was quite a deal when that happened. I would call them after a debate and say, "Hey, come on, now we're in the same church, we serve the same God. Let's define ourselves, but let's be careful with how we do it." So currently, Nancy Mace, who serves as our representative, is a part of our church. We have a senator, Tim Scott, who ran for president. In fact, in the last 6 years, we've had two different presidential candidates from our church. We've had the governor, lieutenant governor, and then folks in the media who cover them. So we've got a broad base. And because of where we live, it's mostly Republican, but we have also Democrats. One candidate for governor was a Democrat this past year that came to our church, and state senators. And so we've got both sides of the aisle.
That's really awesome that you get the opportunity to serve those leaders, from behind the scenes and influence really what's happening in our government and country just by being yourself and preaching the gospel. So, having that experience over the years, I would love to hear from you. Like, how do you feel like this moment that pastors are facing with the political climate is different from maybe in years past? Maybe it's the same, but how would you define the problem that pastors are facing right now when it comes to navigating an election season and staying on mission?
Yeah, and it's a challenge. It's one of the biggest challenges of the year. I know I talk to a lot of pastors who dread this season for good reason. I don't want to belittle it because it's important. It really is. But the most important election in the history of our country has happened several times since I've been pastor. And you have to understand, while it's important, it really, really is. I don't want to belittle that. It's important. It's also a game. There is a way of you've got to get people fired up. You've got to get people mad, angry, whatever. If you don't, people don't go to the
Hmm.
polls. And there's a strategy for that. If you don't understand the strategy, then you'll get jerked every which direction all the time. Understand that, and understand also that politicians, for good or for bad, have a vested interest in us as pastors, being a part of their cause because we influence a lot of people. So just understand that going in. Your interest or your vision may not line up with where they are going. I know many times over the years, I talked about this a couple of weeks ago on Sunday, that we have had national organizations, political action committees, or actually the parties themselves, who have worked very hard to leverage our influence in ways that I was uncomfortable with. And we have never had one of the local politicians that attend our church, not one time has one come to me and said, "Can you do this? Will you do this?" So that, they would say it, in better ways than just so that I can further what I want to do. But never once have they tried to leverage that. And I think part of that, part of the reason so many of them come to the church is because the church is a safe space for them to pursue their relationship with God. And they want to keep it that way. So that's a long, long way around the horn, but that's some of the issues that we deal with.
So, how could pastors make their church a safe place for politicians to attend and make it a safe place for people who have different political opinions?
Well, that's a couple of questions. First of all, one size doesn't fit all. Okay. I have a unique calling and I accept my assignment. And my calling is what we've talked about here is we have people on both sides of the aisle. And some people would say, well, you can't even be a Christian and be a Democrat. I've heard that. I've seen that on
Hmm.
Twitter, and I've been text messaged that before. Well, that's one point of view. That's not my point of view. And we could get deeper into that. But what I want to say is my calling is as a unifier, my calling is to influence politicians behind the scenes more than rally the crowd to follow them in front of the scenes. And that's unique. That's just who I am and what I am. I have other friends that are much, much more overt about supporting one candidate, one political party. And I'm not going to say that's wrong. I'm just not. That's not my deal. That's not mine to judge. That's a calling that people have. Now, here's where I have a real problem. When I see a pastor or an influencer, a leader say, if your pastor doesn't do blank, or if you go to a church that your pastor doesn't do whatever, then you need to, leave or make noise or whatever. That is wrong in my
Mhm.
estimation. I'll just draw a line in the sand and say, in fact, a very big influencer, written some books a lot of people have read, did that last week on X. It was all I could do to stay off of it and say something. And the reason I didn't say something is because I just don't have the energy to to go there right now because that's not what my assignment is. So I'm going to stick in my lane. But I will say, if I'm talking to pastors right now, that's wrong. What they're doing is causing division in the body of Christ in churches. Somebody's going to read that, going to send it to their pastor who's doing his or her best to lead in the way that they think that God has called them to lead. And we saw that in 2020, and it just stirs up all kinds of things. And so I'll draw a line in the sand there. Don't do it. If I know you, I'll go into your DMs and tell you not to do it because that's not right. Now, to have different assignments, different calling, different ways of approaching the whole political thing, I'm okay with that. I'm good with that because,
Mhm.
some of us are called to be activists and some of us are called to be unifiers and some of us are called to be whatever. I get that. But stay in your lane. Well, don't accuse somebody else of being wrong, evil, or bad because they're not in your lane or your calling. That's what I would say.
Yeah, when I was preparing for this episode, I watched and listened to a couple other podcasts and read some things about see what other pastors are saying about the political spectrum and how to be involved. And what you said was a common theme was basically pastors saying, "Hey, I know what I'm called to. I don't get involved with what other people are called to."
Mm-hmm.
And so you did a great job explaining that already, but I just want to highlight that because I felt like that was a common theme and an important thing to focus on is pastors not getting involved in what they're not called to do, but maybe they feel a pressure to because they see someone else being more vocal. And maybe they have someone in their church saying, you need to be vocal this way or be vocal
Oh,
that way.
they
And so
have
how
that
could,
without a
yeah.
doubt. They've got somebody in their church. I've met several in the foyer recently. And here's what's funny is occasionally somebody will say to me, they did this last week. Oh, we understand your reluctance, to do whatever. And I'm not reluctant. That's not it at all. It's a value for me. I'm doing exactly what I feel called by God to do. Okay. So it's not a reluctance. And then I hear this too, and pastors get this, it's cowardice. If you weren't such a coward, in fact, one guy does that, calls people out, calls them cowards and all this kind of stuff. And if you weren't such a coward, you'd stand up. And you know what?
Mhm.
Honestly, the courage is in resisting the pressure to do what you believe is the right thing to do. And so, yeah, if you're a pastor, don't buy all that.
Are you a church planner navigating the complexities of starting a new ministry? Parable understands your journey because their founders, Greg and Jessica Daly, were once in your exact shoes. They know the unique challenges and financial stress you face as a ministry leader, and they are here to help.
With Parable, you can get free accounting services leading up to your launch so you can focus on what matters most, building your church and reaching your community. Join the many church planners who trust Parable to handle their finances with care and expertise. Visit liveyourparable.com viewpoints.com/believeagain to learn more and get 25% off your onboarding fees. As I was thinking of my questions for this podcast, like, you're just answering them all as you go on. So I just want to keep giving you the opportunity to chat more. But what are your values when you're navigating an election season, knowing that the election could go one way or the other, to make sure that you're staying true to your values?
Yeah, Ephesians 4, 1 through 3 governs a lot of what I do and where my values are. Where Paul says to Timothy and the Ephesian church, and he even pulls the apostle card, and he pulls the prisoner for Christ card, and he says, I want you to listen to this. He says, act according to your calling. I want you to act according to your calling. And he gives about 3 things. He says, be completely humble and gentle, number 1. And humility manifests itself in a lot of things, but I feel like in seasons like this, it's good to feel strongly. I feel strongly about some things. Frankly, the pro-life issue has been something that's guided me for a long time. We don't have either party that is strongly pro-life right now. Now, I'm not dense enough to know that you can dig down, and one side is like abortion with joy, and the other side is, ooh, let's get away from it so that we can appeal to more people. So it's probably not exactly the same on that whole deal. That's been an issue for me. We can feel strongly about some things, and that's good. That's good, and search it out and see who represents you better. We also need political humility. We need theological humility. We need personal humility. It's not as black and white as you would seem. I know some people that would say, well, they're hoping that the Republican side wins the Senate, and they can't vote for Trump because of the January 6th, and did he win the election or was it stolen from him, and all that kind of thing. I have problems with that. But if the Republicans win the Senate, it doesn't matter who the president is. In fact, maybe with a longer term strategy in 4 to 8 years, things can be completely different. Well, I don't know if I agree with that or not, but I have to have political humility to understand that it may be a more complex issue and not all of us see it exactly the same, even if we may have the same or similar driving values underneath. And then he says, bear with one another. That's the second thing he says. And that's a value. You and I may not be very, very different politically. I don't know. I know people in my church that I disagree with politically. There's one guy that I've gone to lunch with a few times, and I've said, tell me why I should vote for your candidate who's not one I would vote for. And, they go through it and all this kind of thing. And we have managed to remain good friends, even though we see things differently. And then I've got some other people I just have to tolerate.
Mm-hmm.
I want to cancel, to be frank, um, uh, on both extreme ends, and that's kind of where it seems to be. Is on the extreme left and the extreme right have more in common, I think, than what they realize. But Paul says, I can't cancel them. That I am to bear with. That's a value in a political season, to bear with those who don't agree with me. And then the third thing he says, be completely humble and gentle, bear with in love those, who are difficult. And then he says, and contend for the unity of the faith. And that's why it makes me so mad and so irritated when somebody says, hey, if you go to this church, you need to leave. That's not contending for the unity of the faith. All right. So those are the basic values that drive me in a season like this.
Wow, that's great. That's good advice. And it reminds me too, like on our social media, it's like that's the algorithms are curated to reinforce what we already believe.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're on social media, you're just hearing the same things validating your opinion, which should kind of work you up a little bit to feel like maybe you need to get more involved. I started following people I disagreed with. And I don't do a lot of them because they get on my nerves, and I have unfollowed some. But the people who claim to be a Christian and are on a different political position than me, I follow them so I could hear them, because there is a tension here,
Yeah.
with some of these hot topic issues like guns and different things. Like, why do they feel that way? And just hearing their heart, I think, has really helped me. What advice would you give pastors during election season on navigating social media?
Yeah. Well, you just gave good advice. One is never make a post when you're mad. It's just not a good idea. It might sound good in the moment, but it's not going to. If you're a pastor, you've got to determine what is your calling, who's God called you to lead, and understand that whatever it is that you post is going to sound louder than even what you think it is, especially to those who are following you. And in our church, and I think every church is like this, you've got those that are mature in the faith and those that are just brand new in the faith. And those brand new in the faith are bringing all kinds of stuff with them. And they're in a process. And sometimes you can short circuit the process with, a rash post or,
Hmm.
whatever. You got to realize what's the end game, what's the long game here. The long game is not Tuesday, November, whatever it is, 4th, is it 3rd or 4th, whenever the election is.
Yeah.
Um, and by the way, most people will have voted by then. We're doing early voting at Seacoast right now. In fact, our Mount Pleasant campus is the largest volume early voting place in South Carolina. Okay.
Hmm.
It's got longer lines and more people than anywhere else in South Carolina. So most people will have voted by the time the election comes. Again, I want to say this is important. Okay. I don't want to say the election isn't important. It is, because it's not just the person, it's all the people they appoint, it's all of those things. So it's important, but it's not the end of the world. All right. We are a part of a higher kingdom. We have an allegiance to a higher kingdom. We are not identified. I'm an American, but that's about third on the list. Maybe fourth on the list. I don't know. I'm a Christian. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm an American. I'm proud to be an American. I didn't choose that. Somebody else chose it for me. I'm grateful for that extremely. But there is a higher allegiance. And I tell myself this all the time. If my candidate doesn't win this weekend, you know what, or next weekend, whenever it is, that's not a surprise to God, and God's going to be okay. And we're gonna figure it out, and we're gonna keep winning people for the Lord, and keep seeing people conformed into the image of Christ.
Wow, well, that's that might be a good note to end this whole conversation on. Maybe a nice little segue into wrapping things up would be a post you shared a couple weeks ago. You text pastors and send them messages on Wednesdays and Sundays, and
Mhm.
you shared one on a Wednesday a couple weeks ago about just navigating this divisive time that we're in, this scary time that we're in. And I thought it'd be good for you just kind of talk about the message you send to pastors.
Again, I believe that the biggest thing the world needs from the church right now are more accurate images of who God is. In other words, it's important what you do in the ballot box. Okay, and you need to do that. I encourage people to vote, even though I don't find it anywhere in Scripture that that's one of the top 4 or 5 things you ought to do. But I think as a responsible citizen, you ought to vote. But how you respond to those who don't agree with you in that sacred moment of the ballot box is probably nearly as important. Well, it's more important because it lasts longer than your vote. Because what the world needs to see is a more accurate reflection of who God is. It's so interesting. I've been studying this a lot. In the Old Testament, there were 613, I think, laws. Jesus had one. we have one. Love one another, and that's it. So anyway, that's important. Let me just say this: that if you would like to get a video, quick video, and I do every Sunday, I do it just strictly to pastors, and it's like 2 minutes, something like that. Sometimes I go a little longer than that, but it's about 2 minutes. That's what I aim at. And it's just an encouragement before you preach or serve or whatever it is that you do, from one pastor to another pastor. And then on Wednesdays, it's a broader audience. It's pastors and, just people that follow what I do. And it's No Worry Wednesday, where I try to apply a little sanctified psychology from God's Word on, how you operate in today's world. But if you'd like to do that, here's a number. It's 833 349 7516. 833 349 7516. And just text one word to that. If you're a pastor, just text the word pastor to 833 349 7516. Don't text anything else, just pastor. And then it will ask you a few questions, and you can respond and fill that out. And it's free. And so anyway, it's what I love to do.
Well, we'll make sure to list that number in the show notes. So whether they're listening to this through a podcast platform or watching on YouTube, they can get that number. And Pastor Greg, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with me about this today. I'm so excited to share this with all the pastors listening and hopefully get some wisdom out there when things are feeling unsettled during the election season.
Well, thank you, Josh. I love what you're doing. Love how you love pastors.
That was such a powerful and timely conversation with Greg Surratt. Navigating the election season as a pastor is no easy task. I don't envy any pastor out there that's having to do this, but I think his wisdom reminds us that our role is to keep the focus on Jesus and to guide people with grace and unity. A thought I had while reflecting on this episode was it seems to me that in these days it's more radical to be moderate than it is to actually be radical. It seems like less and less people are willing to value understanding other people's point of view and giving credence to their history that might bring them to a certain conclusion, or have the humility to hold their opinion in one hand and someone else's in the other and not having to fight over it. And so I hope this episode was helpful today. I hope it was encouraging to you as a pastor and a leader. I hope it's helping you prepare to lead through this next season. We're going to get through this and we're going to keep our eyes on Jesus, and we're all going to be better for it. And if you're joining us today for the first time, I just want to say thank you for listening to this episode of the Believe Again podcast. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, make sure to follow the podcast on Instagram at believeagain.co. We post all kinds of content throughout the week. And we would really love if you would rate us on your favorite podcast platform. If you send me a screenshot, I would love to post it and celebrate you. And thank you for sharing this episode with a friend who could use it. And finally, I want to give a special thank you to our sponsor. We couldn't do this without Parable Church Accounting and Bookkeeping. They make this podcast possible. Please check them out. Just go visit them at liveyourparable.com/believeagain. If you're a church planner, they'll give you 9 months of free accounting services. There's just a small onboarding charge leading up to your launch of your church so that you can start off with good, clean books. They have a ton of resources on that liveyourparable.com/believeagain website. And of course, if you use Believe Again when you sign up, they'll give you 25% off your onboarding. And as always, keep believing and leading strong.